שלום, ברוכים הבאים להסכת על אומנות החיים, הפודקאסט על הפילוסופיה הסטואית. שמי רכידר, אני יועץ פילוסופיה, אני מלמד פילוסופיה סטואית. אתם מוזמנים לאתר שלי stoire.com. באתר אתם יכולים לפנות אליי לשיחות ייעוץ אישיות או להירשם גם לקורס הבא. היום אני אלווה אתכם לתוך ציטוט שאולי יסייע לכם ולו במעט בנבחי החיים. היום יש פרק מיוחד של ראיון עם אלכסנדר צוק, שהוא מכר שלי שעוסק בפילוסופיה סטואית מגרמניה, הוא מפרנקפורט, הוא כתב ספר על סטואיות ומנהיגות, הוא עוסק בייעוץ ארגוני, הוא דוקטור גם באופן מעניין מאוד מאוניברסיטת תל אביב, דווקא לגיאופיזיקה, אבל הוא עשה הסבה, והוא עוסק באימון, בייעוץ, בהקמת צוותים, הוא עוסק המון בארגונים בכל מה שקשור לזה, והוא כתב ספר על מנהיגות ועל סטואיות. והספר שלו, לצערי בגרמנית, אני לא יכול לקרוא את הספר שלו, גם הוא לא מתכוון כרגע לתרגם אותו לאנגלית, אבל כן עשינו ראיון, ובראיון הוא מספר על הספר, וכמובן מה שאנחנו יכולים לקחת ממנו לחיים שלנו בלי קשר למנהיגות. מי שמעוניין את הראיון עצמו אפשר לראות גם ביוטיוב עם תרגום לעברית, עם כתוביות. כיוון שבפודקאסט בהאזנה הוא באנגלית בלבד, אז מי שרוצה מוזמן גם לפנות ליוטיוב, שם אפשר לבחור בכתוביות, בהגדרות גם את כתוביות בעברית, וזה מופיע שם. אז תהנו.
Yeah.
Hello to Alexander Zuk. We're talking I'm from Israel, you're in Germany, right?
Mm-hmm. Hi.
And how about you introduce yourself and we will start conversation about your new book.
Yeah, very nice, and thanks for having me. So, well, I'm sitting here in Germany in the vicinity of Frankfurt am Main, and I'm an organizational consultant, self-employed, and that means I'm dealing with organizations, leadership, coaching, team development, and things like this. And I'm doing this now for about 15 years. And before that, I was working in a corporate environment. I was a managing director of a little institute before for some time. I was working at Lufthansa for some time in different positions. And in my first life, I was a geophysicist and planetary scientist, and I have a PhD from Tel Aviv University.
So, and how is your Hebrew?
שכחתי הכל.
Well, you need to practice. We need to meet more, and then we can practice on your Hebrew.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I was always trying to catch up, but it's not that easy if you don't speak anymore.
Yeah, definitely. It's not an easy language at all, but definitely for a German speaker. But
yeah. That's true.
And I invited you because I invited you to the conversation, to our podcast, because I saw you wrote a book about stoicism and leadership. And since I do not read in German or read or talk in German, so I thought maybe you can give us some kind of summary about your book, about what's about, and we'll talk about leadership and stoicism, in the time we have.
Yeah. So maybe I start with the general idea in the beginning. Like the publishers approached me because they knew that I'm a consultant and I'm dealing with organizations and leadership and everything, but they also knew that I'm running a Stoic community here in Germany, like a Stoic podcast and meetup and so on. So that I have been working on Stoic ideas for more than a decade, I guess I would say. From a personal point of view, as a life philosophy, but also trying to get a better understanding of this with other people, like reading books and stuff like that. So the idea or the question was, when they approached me, is couldn't there be a book that tries to use Stoic ideas for leadership so that we can provide some guidance to leaders? And I thought it was a really interesting idea, and I liked it to combine like two passions of myself. And then I was looking into the literature, and I was asking myself, okay, what's out there? What have people done? And when I was looking, I was kind of amazed that there is not really a lot around, not in the English-speaking literature, not in the German literature. And you can actually find like 2 or 3 books. And the 2 books that do have the title Stoa and Leadership, they are self-published. So it's not like there is really like an official publisher that took up this issue so far. And the interesting thing is also that there are like two approaches that you can find. One is learn from an ancient leader like Marcus Aurelius. And as I mentioned before, there are not so many emperor positions available anymore. So I thought that this might not be the greatest path to follow, because I was also thinking that in the modern leadership environment, the understanding of leadership is so different from some of the old principles or the old settings that I thought it would be really difficult if I would just try to write a book and tell people, look, this is what Marcus Aurelius did, and try to copy this into your environment as a Scrum Master. I guess you can understand that this might create some kind of cognitive dissonances, because this is such a different environment. And nowadays, I think if we want to reach people in leadership environments, I'm not just calling it positions, but environments, we need to think about something else. And then the second approach was, okay, why not take some Stoic principles and teach the people the principles? Like, do this, do that. But then I think the problem is that this is wisdom which is not contextualized. So like the people don't really know then what is meant by this principle if there is no embedding in the overall systematic of the Stoic philosophy. So it could give you some impressions, but it doesn't really, I would say, trigger an inner development. It's something like copy and paste. And it might be that you do something which is absolutely BS in the end if you do this.
Yeah, it's a lot of the modern Stoicism go on the path of life hack more than
yes. Yeah.
life philosophy.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Which would do, like you said, copy and paste, do that. But yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I remembered that during one of my leadership trainings that I did, I was working with a little book actually by James March. And James March is a kind of well-known organizational theorist, was working in the 80s, 90s, very well known. And he had a very interesting take on leadership from my point of view, because his basic starting point was that he said, look, the challenges that you are faced with in leadership are actually identical to the challenges and problems in life. So what does he mean? That means that I would translate it in the way that leadership has some kind of an existential dimension. So that it's not just a methodological and technical issue. If you are in a leadership position or in a leadership environment, you need to be aware of the fact that there will always be situations that are actually kind of existential. Think about someone is terminally sick, and sits in front of you and discusses with you how to deal with him or her, leaving the company and to prepare to, and so on. Or people have just lost their partner, or things like this, or people have drug problems or addictions, whatever. This kind of problems actually require more than just a training in how to ask questions and how to be attentive or whatever. Yeah, it needs some kind of an inner compass. And I would translate this into one of the first core hypotheses of the book, that you say the existential dimension of leadership is too often overlooked and can only be handled in a good way if you have something like a life philosophy at hand, which provides you some kind of an inner compass to navigate these kind of situations.
Let me ask you a question. Sorry to interrupt you, because first your picture is frozen again. Maybe you can do something about that on your end. And I wanted to ask you, when you're talking about the existential part, you mean of the leader or the environment, people around him, or you're talking about the leaders themselves, their own existential issues?
Actually, both.
Both.
So we're talking about the fact that I need to be aware of my existential dimensions. What does this do to myself when I'm dealing with these situations? And I need to be able to deal with the existential dimensions of the situation of the person that is sitting in front of me. And maybe let's do a stop here, and I will just change from wireless to the other
Yeah.
cable because I got
Sure.
to do this. This is the reason why I'm frozen. So it might be that I'm out and I will have to come in again. So I guess you have to stop this at this point.
Okay,
I'm really sorry. I should have thought about that before.
that's okay. Okay. So if I understand you correctly, and I think there is a passage in Marcus Aurelius that says something about once you're sitting in front of a person, you need to see where what his path, what he means to analyze his attentions. I don't remember exactly by heart the quote, but he has a passage about seeing the person in front of you.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's talking several times about the way that he wants to, or you should deal with your environment out of your official position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can learn a lot from these quotes, but first I think you have to establish some kind of a connection that makes some meaningful context for these kind of quotes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I was looking for in the second step.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing was for me like to establish this kind of connection. And there was a second thing inside of the work of James March, and this was that he was pointing towards the fact that leadership typically is related to some kind of attention management. What do I mean by that? That he says, well, you are always confronted by certain tensions. For example, formal life versus your private life. Because if you are in a leadership position, you need to be able to represent, you need to be able to behave and, to show yourself in a way which is adequate to the position that you're in. But on the other hand, you have a private life and you might want to be different in that respect. So there's always a tension. So what do I actually bring into my, so to say, public role, and what do I keep in my private role, and things like this. Or for example, when you're talking about innovation versus continuation, when do I have to break structures and when do I have to keep them alive? This is a typical tension that you will always find in such working environments. Or for example, gender equality, like how much equality will be, let's say, justified in your given environment. Yeah. And should you adapt to gendered language or should you not adapt? Mm-hmm. If you adapt, people will look at you from a certain perspective. If you don't adapt, people will look at you. So yes. Whatever you do, there will be some kind of tension left with this, or submission versus participation, or domination versus participation. And you can feel these kind of tensions can never be decided forever. So what you need to understand is you have to find some kind of a position inside of these tensions. And then again, where do you take the inner compass from to find the right positioning in these tension fields? Mm-hmm. And that's, again, from my point of view, the second contribution of a life philosophy to these kind of leadership environments. And the idea would then be, okay, what kind of tensions do I find in these kind of leadership environments? And what did, for example, the ancients tell us how to deal with this? And March had an interesting take because he said, well, to be able to deal with this in a better way, read literature, mm-hmm. Great literature, like War and Peace, or, Othello or whatever, these kind of plays or pieces that give you an indication of how did people deal with this in the literature and what can you take from this. And if you look at the ancients, for example, the Stoics were quite famous for citing Homer and, yes. For example, they were also dealing with the playwriters in ancient Athens. So there is some kind of connection between the literature and the people that are dealing, for example, then later on with leadership development and so on. And so March actually recommended in his book, leadership trainings should be full of literature and not full of technical stuff.
The ancient ones were all the time given examples from historical figures and from the mythology. You can find in Epictetus a lot of examples from the Greek mythology. For examples, he wants to which is actually with the books, the discourses is a live conversation with his students. So you can infer from that he's making conversation is giving references to ancient literature. Yeah, like you said, very interesting.
Yeah. And if you look at the past, what you will find then is, there was this kind of tradition, like Plutarch, who wrote about these double biographies of the Romans and the Greeks.
Yeah.
So that was all meant, from my understanding, for the younger people that will be joining the elite to get some kind of idea, like what can you copy, what should you avoid, and things like this. And I would claim that life philosophy, like the tradition in the Hellenistic period, is some kind of a systematization of this kind of effort. Instead of reading the literature, try to systematize the human condition in the framework of this kind of life philosophy. So that's why I think you can, follow March's claim by shifting it a little bit from literature to a life philosophy of the Hellenistic design.
Very interesting.
That's the kind of idea behind my book, and then I will follow in two parts. First, development of a picture of leadership that allows you to understand leadership as attention management, following this general idea that March came up with. And the second part is try to develop some kind of idea of a personal identity development scheme taken from the Stoic literature and from the Stoic philosophy. And that there's a surprising element in this kind of development, which I can elaborate a little bit more on, but I have been talking for so long, maybe I should stop and give you the opportunity to ask more questions.
No, it's very interesting. So what came to mind for me is you're talking about leadership, but is it something that you can take to everyday life for people who are not in a position of leadership in workplace or public figures? Because once you speak about the tension between your private life and your position, I think it's a different dimension with you coming to everyday life when you're not in a public position.
I would say these kind of tensions are actually applicable to everybody. But if you're in a leadership position, it's more like focused, like through these kind of burning glasses, like through a lens. Then it's extremely important that you are able to deal with these kind of tensions, because you're not only responsible for yourself, but you carry a lot of responsibility for a lot of other people, for the environment that the people live in, work in, and so on. And that's why I think it's so important that leaders actually take up this challenge and task to deal with this. And maybe one sidetrack, the second part of the book, which leads to this kind of Stoic ideas about personal development. Well, I start this part with introduction and some reflection on Socrates, because the Stoics were very fond of Socrates, and I think they are very close to him in when it comes to some basic ideas. And then I'm analyzing the Plato's dialogue as Alcibiades, or Alcibiades in English. And I was really, really amazed when I was reading it again and I was looking at it, because like he's absolutely talking about these kind of tensions in this dialogue. And he's talking about the fact that if you don't have let's say a life philosophy that helps you to stabilize your ego, you will not be able to lead other people.
That is a very strong point. Very strong point. I think the entire philosophy, or life philosophy, is balancing your ego. It's the separation between you and the world and the reality, and the how you manage your own view regarding reality, and checking yourself that you are aligned with reality, which most people do the opposite. Trying to manage reality according to their own perspective. So I think it's a very strong point that life philosophy is something that's perspective, giving you the right perspective in life.
It helps you to deal with the things in life in the right way. This is like Socrates, how he described it.
Yeah.
And I was really amazed, and also I really had to laugh when I read the dialogue again, because Alcibiades, I mean, he's like the prototype of these young hotshots, like good looking, very talented, maybe brought up in a very good family and stuff like that. And they think at 18, 19, 20, the only thing is missing is the position to rule the world. And the funny thing is how Socrates picks up this guy and, brings him into a conversation and asks him, so I heard you want to be one of the leaders in the convention of the Athenians. He said, yes. Ah, interesting. So what did you learn that the Athenians might profit from? And then he says, well, from my understanding, you learned how to play the sitar, and you learned how to write, and you learned about grammar, and you learned about something else. And he asked, so these are the things that the Athenians will profit from. And he was like, okay, you might be right, maybe, but never mind. There are some other things that might be important. So then he drags him into this kind of reflection in his typical way of talking about these things in a Socratic dialogue. And I mean, the whole dialogue ends with Alcibiades being actually completely lost in understanding. I don't have the basic qualification to do this.
Yeah,
And,
I think, well, just for our audience, Alcibiades was a student of Socrates. There's a part when Socrates tells him that he's married to his stupidity, since to his ignorance, actually. And
yes.
history teaches us that this person, Alcibiades, convinced the Athenians to fight in Sicily. They lost, which made them weak. And then they lost to the Spartans, and Alcibiades defected and moved to Sparta, got some kind of shelter in Sparta. And there he cheated on the king that gave him a shelter with his wife, flee, and went to the Persians and tried to help the Persians. So his ego was something that, like you said, was really not in check. It was something that he followed his ego, and Socrates warned him about that he doesn't have what it takes to be a leader, since he is ignorant about what is important in life.
Yeah, and he actually made him understand that if you want to be a leader, you need to understand what the people and the system around you needs. And he tells them, well, the basic decisions that need to be taken, for example, are the ones about war and peace, and other stuff. And he asked him, what do you need to help people in these decisions? And he said, well, you need to understand justice. So what does it mean to understand justice? And in the end, he works towards the fact that you need to be capable of being internally virtuous. That means to be practically wise, to be moderate, to be just, and to be courageous. And otherwise, if you don't have this, you will not be able to, come to be up to the task at hand. And that is what I think is very nicely captured in this dialogue by Plato. And this is like a starting point then to try to understand what was the Stoic answer to this. And I mean, this is a bit more complicated story, but in the end, it's about the Stoic idea of oikeiosis, which is translated into English appropriation, which is this kind of development idea that people from when they are babies follow a certain way of development, which means that we familiarize ourselves with our environment, with ourselves. And through this process that first starts in an intuitive way, and then at the age of 14, 15, becomes a rational development that on the one hand is about trying to understand what we can really control while we develop ourselves, which brings us to Epictetus' dichotomy of control. The only thing we can actually control is our free will inside ourselves. And the second aspect is that we are always embedded in an environment and following, for example, like Stoic principles like sympatheia, that everything is connected and we are made for each other, which means, like, for example, following the principles of Hierocles, like the circles of Hierocles, that we step by step have to widen our horizon to be, a fitting part in this cosmos. So, and the interesting thing is, if you look at the development path that the Stoics describe, and there is one interesting source in Cicero, where he describes certain stages. And if you look at these stages, what he's talking about is like the first stage in the rational maturation is that you are dealing with your inner impulses. And there are natural impulses, like you are hungry and you are thirsty and you want this and you want that. And then these impulses might be tweaked so they become non-natural, so that you eat too much, you drink too much, you do some nonsense stuff and so on. So, and the next development stage after that would be that he calls it that you are dealing with yourself cum officio. And cum officio means in that respect, out of the position, like a role that is given to you in life. So you become a friend, you become maybe later on a father, you become a teacher, like these different things that society provides us that we can live in.
It's
and these
on
kind
duties,
of roles,
right? On his book,
yeah,
on
duties.
Yeah.
No, yeah, and duties in part, but also on the highest good and the highest the biggest
on
evil.
the ends of good and bad.
Yeah, in the end. Thanks. And then the next step is that in Latin it's called like to do this more often, to do this longer and long term. And what this means, or how can you interpret this, is that if you are in a position in changing environments, what becomes important is that you build some skill set that is related to the basic idea behind these kind of roles. So you need to actually become skillful so that you can professionally execute these kind of roles, for example. And the next step is to be, it's called in Latin again, like up to the most continuous way to do this. And then you can ask yourself, okay, how can I actually be capable in changing environments to do this in a very long-term perspective? And the idea would be, well, I need to balance the requirements of a role, and I need to balance this with the skill set that I have. And how do we do this? Typically by setting goals, because goals do balance these two aspects inside of ourselves. So this becomes like a triangle. Yeah, there is this kind of role requirement on us from the outside. There is our inner skill set, and the balance between is the goals that we find. And whenever there is a good, let's say, relationship between the three, there is something inside of ourselves which we could call harmony or coherence. And the Stoic term for this would be homologia. And this homologia can be separated into an inner homologia and also an homologia with the environment.
I understand.
So if you take this is like a concept of a person with the different aspects. So that is the Stoic picture.
You're speaking of picture, your picture froze again, and we have 5-7 minutes more, and I would like to ask you what kind of maybe since we're talking about life philosophy, what do you find is, oh, here you are again. What do you find is the most helpful Stoic idea to leaders, to managers, or in public life? What do you think is the most important quality to possess in a leader?
Well, I think
excuse me, or maybe what is like you said right now, you need to make it out of a habit for yourself. So what is the quality that you would make sure that is the strongest to make a habit of in order to be a good leader?
Well, I think the idea behind the Stoic picture of a person that I described before, that comes out of the archaeosis picture, which is also similar to the idea of the four persona that was set up by Panaitios, is that if you follow this idea, what it tells you is whatever you do, you need to make sure that the inner coherence will be still in place after you have executed your action, plus that you contribute to an outer coherence too, because you're surrounded by external systems, like, for example, a team or an organization, or even, like if you are sitting there with an employee and you're having a conversation, like, what is the performance of this? Like in the end, it's about what does contribute to the coherence of these settings. And for that, there is some kind of a checklist that the Stoics provide us. For example, I mean, is it practically wise to do what you want to do? Is it moderate to do what you want to do? Is it just to do what you want to do? Is it courageous to do what you do? You could also ask if it's virtuous. It's also beautiful. And there's an aesthetic perspective to this. So does it add to the beauty of the environment and of the interaction of the people if you implement certain things? And you can, like, extend this kind of list, but it all depends on this core idea of homologia. If it doesn't increase the homologia inside of you and inside of in the environment that you're acting in, most probably it's not a good virtuous action that you're looking for. And to enable you to do this in a better way, it might be helpful to follow certain Stoic ideas, for example, like Stoic attention, that you are actually connected to the dynamics of your inner free will. Because typically we just follow what the inner free will is doing with us. Yeah, it's not that we are in control of it. Our attention goes here and then it goes there and we do this and that, and afterwards we focus, why did I do this? And the Stoics tell us, stay closer to what you're doing and slow it down and ask yourself, do I really want to do this? And this is related to a second Stoic idea. Always have this kind of Stoic role model with you, like someone sitting on your shoulder and commenting what you're doing. Yeah, keep on doing, then it will be really crappy. Or maybe it might be a good idea to slow down a little bit so that you have a chance to think about it.
Yeah, like Socrates' demon.
Yeah, right. And the third aspect would be what the Stoics call eleuteria, the inner freedom. If you are in a leadership position, ask yourself, are you really free inside? Or are you connected to some, like, I really, really need to keep this position. I really, really need to get this raise. I really, really, really need to get this promotion. If you do this, you are not free inside. And if you're not free, you most probably will not be able to contribute to the environment in the way that it is necessary to contribute, because the team needs you in a certain way, but you are distracted because you're on a career path.
Yes.
These kind of ideas. And last but not least, you could also think about the Stoic disciplines. For example, when you think about Epictetus' 3 disciplines, question your assent. What do you actually assent to? What do you not assent to? And why? The desire. Have you actually thought about why you desire certain things, and what is the desire that you actually want to allow yourself or not? And justice. What is it that people are actually, what do they deserve in your environment? Often you see that people are thinking too much about themselves, but not enough about what other people in their environment deserve. Like appreciation or time, support, whatever. And maybe the last issue might be the idea of the Stoic cosmopolis, of the Stoic sages, because there's a nice description of how would the Stoic sages deal with each other in the cosmopolis. And I think I really, really like this description because it's based on friendship. And the Stoic sage is not an omniscient person. I mean, it doesn't know everything, but what he knows is stable knowledge. So the sages can still teach each other.
Yes.
They can support each other and they can appreciate each other. And I really like the idea that as a leadership person, that you are always trying to act out of the idea of what if I would already be living in a cosmopolis of Stoic sages and I would be surrounded by sages, how would I behave? And I think that is a very good way to guide your actions.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Never thought about it that way in a leadership point of view. I would just add one more thing for before we finish. There's a a part in Cicero as well when he says, when you come to a certain position, you need to make sure you get more advices from professional people, from people around you, in order for not being in that ego part that you talked about. So you need to even when the higher you go on the rank, you need more to get advices. You need more to ask people around you. I think this is a very important part
Be
about
humble.
that. The humbles you very much. Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. That's the time we have. I need to make sure that we talk more often.
Yes, always
a pleasure. And then you are invited to Israel once things here will be more relaxed.
Settle a bit, yes.
Settle a bit, It was great seeing you again. And thank you very much. And maybe one day your book will be in English so I can read it as well.
Well, I hope so. But
or
thanks
I'll learn German one day.
Maybe I can recover my Hebrew, but
that'll be a great solution as well. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Barak, and be well.
See you soon. Ciao.
Ciao.